Welcome to the Yeshiva Shalmaila. This is David Lichtenstein, and this week we're going to be speaking about medicine and halacha, but from a particular angle. What about doctors? As a Fruma community, we would want to have doctors. I mean, there's a certain rapport that a Fruma person has with somebody who's from Anash, somebody who's a co-religionist. That both halachic issues and a sense of trust, there's a certain comfort. You know that the Taz in Shulchan Aruch and Shin Chav Ches says that on Shabbos it's preferred to have, if you have to mechal, it's preferably should be done by a fruma because they will exercise a care that's with greater love. But our community does need doctors, but that raises a question. Your child, your nephew, you want to go into medicine, can you? Shabbos, you're going to be in school, right? They're not going to give them choices often. It's about working on Shabbos. We're going to have, by the way, on Dr. Kadish, the head of Touro, who has the only fruma Shomer Shabbos medical school in the Western Hemisphere, I think in the world, except for Israel. So, what are Shabbos issues? DNR issues. You know, you're a resident. They say, pull the plug on so and so. Oh, that could be a Shaila of Ritzicha. What about the biggest one of all? Oh, well, we spoke about Shmira Shabbos. We have abortion issues. We're going to hear so many different issues. Then we're going to have can a Kohein become a doctor? I know a boy, he became a doctor. And the question is, what does he do with the child of Thomas Mace with cadavers? What happens if a Kohein, their Kohein is a surgeon, and somebody died in the operating table? Well, in Kuf Chav Ches, it's Birchas Kehanim, it says that a Kohein sheharagas hanefesh is not allowed to be oila anymore. Well, what do we do with? So we're going to have on a really wonderful group of guests this week. We're going to start with the number one halachic expert in the world on medicine, Rabbi Dr. Avrohom Steinberg. He wrote the Encyclopedia of Medicine. He wrote maybe 15 svarim on medicine, but he is Talmud Muvak of Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So he's undisputed, the number one halachic expert. We will lead with him. Then we will have Dr. Alan Kadish, who is the provost of Touro, the president, the head of Touro, and he will be speaking about both in their medical school and their dental school what they do for fruma physicians regarding all the above referenced questions as well as Kehanim. We will have a fruma Rabbi Dr. Roth from Lakewood, who's both an excellent doctor, went to Yale, and as well as at the same time he heads the Halacha Medicine Chabura in Lakewood. And from Cleveland we will have Dr. Malcmacher. So we have again a well-known, prestigious dentist, physician, the head of the Cleveland Hebrew Academy. So we're pulling again 4 cities, 2 continents. Should be a fascinating program. Before we go to it, I would like to say a small vart on the parsha. This week is all about Birchas Yaakov, the blessing of Yaakov. Now, what's a bracha? When somebody says, could you please get me a bracha for a shidduch, for a chayla, for parnasa, you go in and you get a varma bracha. You know, Yaakov Avinu's brachas are really very different types of brachas. I mean, he doesn't bench the first 3 at all. He just says to them, beside them, al tavi nafshi, b'kalam al tefet kivaydi, and we wonder, where is the brachas? Right, where he benches them. Then, when he goes to the other ones, I mean, some are more complex, but I'll do the easy ones. Like, Zvulun l'chayf yamim yishked. Zvulun, this is where you're going to live. Hu l'chayf aniyas v'yarkes el tzidin. You're going to be a merchant. You're a merchant. And where's the blessing? Where's the bracha? I kind of, Yisachar chamar garem rayvitz pedam mishpasayim. He saw it's good and he learned. Like, so where's the bracha? He didn't say you should strike out in learning. Don yad dinamai. Right? God gidud jigudenu. God is a warrior. Who yagadakev. Right? Me'asher shmeina lachmai. Who yetem matan. Naftali ayala shlucha. Who hanaisein. Doesn't even say he should give. He says this. These are facts. And if you go through all of them, there's really no bracha practically by any of them. By Lishuasla Kivisi Hashem, stick in a small line. So where is the bracha in Birchas Yaakov? And it gets, when you go to Birchas Moshe, it's not that much better. right? L'levi amar tumecha v'urecha ish hasidecha. You have the Urim v'Tumul. Thank you. I know that, right? Ha'ima la'aviv v'le'imai la'risiv es achav la'hekir. Right? Yeru mishpatecha li'Yaakov. Okay, this was your job. At the end he says Baruch Hashem Chele, but most of it is not. L'binyamin amar yedid Hashem yishkein levetach alav. There's not a lot of bracha here. Right? Yechi Ruvain va'al yamas. V'hi misav misper. You're still nechlal in the shvatim. No bracha. Right? It's really very different, and we're at two other brachas, but let me point out to two other brachas. The bracha of Yitzchak that we say every Matzah Shabbos, really, that sounds like a Rebbish bracha. V'yitin lecha lekim, itala shamayim, mishmani aretz, v'rev dagam, v'sirei shechven. And in this week's parsha, by Ephraim and Menashe, what does it say? Elokim haraya oisi me'oidi ad hayom hazeh. Right, the Rabbi Shalom, who step by step, every portion of my life was with me. Right? What should they do? He should shelter them and call them in his. That's a bracha. What happened to Yaakov and Moshe? Like they it seems like they copped out, right? So I want to share with you a thought that you may agree or disagree with, but it's a thought, okay? It's something a little controversial. Today in the world, everybody, when you go to yeshiva, what do they say to everybody? Those eiswachsen sein a gadol b'Yisrael. That's the bar mitzvahs brachas are the same. The chinuch is pretty much most Haredi yeshivas in the same. I don't know what it's like in the MO, and there's something very beautiful about it. We wish everybody. But you must know boys, maybe yourself, and you said, "Wow, like he's really going to be a gadol b'Yisrael. This guy has zitzfleisch. He has like a triangular bottom. I mean, he can't sit for more than 2 minutes at a time. He's no scholar." I mean, that's we've all had these thoughts, but you get older, and I studied Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs basically was the great personality you needed for work, and it identifies 16 different core personalities that exist, and everybody's one of these 16, and you're born with it. It's like a tiger's stripes. There are introverts and there are extroverts, and you're never changing. An introvert is not becoming an extrovert. An extrovert is not becoming an introvert. An introvert can learn how to get along with people, and if he has to, but you take an introvert and you say, you're going to be the fundraiser for the yeshiva, or you're going to be the salesperson. You're really casting this person into a role where he's going to be really unhappy, and he's going to struggle, and going to work, or every day he's going to be miserable. You take an extrovert, you put him in front of a computer screen for a long time, or for that matter, even a Gemara, and he's going to really struggle. It's just not his stripes. Those are two of the personalities, or two of the things. And it continues down. There are people who see big picture, people who notice detail. You ever see there are people, they walk into doors, they dress, they don't really care. They're thinking big picture ideas. And there are people, they notice everything. You leave the room and they'll say, "Did you notice that so-and-so was wearing a funny sheitel today, or a tie, depending on the gender?" And it's not one is right or one is wrong. These are the 16 personalities. And you know what the biggest blessing a person could have is knowing what his personality is and what he's good at. And you know what? Lahavdil, the opposite of the biggest blessing is like when you look at somebody and they just in delusion land as to what their skill set is. We interview a guy. I have a Bachram come to me and he says he wants to become a data scientist. So I spent a half an hour schmoozing with him. All I could think of, I said, "Look, you're never going to be a data scientist. It's just so against every facet of your personality. You're outgoing, you're friendly, you love to joke, you jumped up already 12. That's not what a data." So the biggest blessing is know thyself. Because you could have, a really, really talented person who would be the greatest Talmud Chacham scholar. You put him into a sales position and he's going to fail. And then you put the greatest sales position and say, "We need you Your job is to learn Rajba all day, Ola Havdil. It's to write a computer program. He's going to be miserable and be terrible at it too. So the ultimate bracha is, this is your skill set, this is who you are, and recognize your contribution. And there's no right or wrong. There's 16 personalities. Each one of them has had great people. But this is your contribution. This is where you can contribute. And this is already Torah. Here's the exception. 2 brachas in the Torah that are given, without this. Yaakov comes in dressed up as Esav to his father, and he gives him a bracha that we today would call a bracha. And you know why? Because he couldn't place him. He had no idea. Here's this. He's Kol Yaakov Yadayim Yidei. So I don't know who you are. So you know what? I'm going to give you the bracha, the second bracha, the bracha that's a tefillah. V'yitin l'chalekim. But it's not the best bracha. Because a tefillah, it's like sort of, it's good to have mazel, but it's more important to be able to do the right thing. Right? The same thing when he says, Mi Eile. They come in, Ephraim and Menashe, and the Malbim as Torah, why he couldn't identify them. They were dressed like Arabs. Whatever Mi'ela. So he says, Banayhem, they're my children. So you know what he says? Alikim, Ashes, Halchu, Avoisai, Lefana Mitzvah. Right? A Malach, he should shelter them. That's the bracha that we're used to calling the tefillah. But what's the biggest blessing? The biggest blessing is know thyself. Know thy child. Know thy Talmud. What are his skill sets? Give him a Myers-Briggs, or if you're a Rebbe, you may know this, or a health worker, you may know this intuitively. What are your skill sets? And because it's much better to become great at what you're good at, right, than to become good at what you're bad at. So, and most leaders, successful people, become great by, they work on their skill set, and they try to manage what they're poor at. They don't spend a lot of effort. It's manage your weaknesses. You're never going to be good at details. Or on the contrary, you're never going to be good at big picture. Figure out somebody to help you with it. But Zois habracha sheberach Moshe, know thyself. That is the biggest blessing. The second blessing, the b'diavad blessing, is Hamalach Hagoyel, V'yitan Lecha Elokim. But best is what you could do for yourself. Es yigia kapai ro Elokim b'yoichach amesh. The doyla yigias kapayim yoisa mischus avos. Okay? And now for the riddle of the week. It says, Vayoyme Yosef al Aviv, Loichein Avi. It says, before that, Yaakov Sikeles Yadav, he crossed his hands. Ki zeh ha'bechor, siyeh mincha al roshai, Vayemoin Aviv, Vayomer Yadati b'ni Yadati. We have a disagreement between Yosef and his father, and Yosef says, Loichein Avi, that's not the right way to do it. I know you want to give this one a bracha because you have your reasons, but Loichein, the Gemara in Kedushin, on the Flamet Aleph Amid Beis, in the Sugi of Kibbutz says, Ezu Moira, it says, Ish Ave v'imay Tiro. Person is a chi of Kibbut and is a chi of Moira. What's the difference between Kibbut Aveim and Moira Aveim? It says, one of Moira is Leisaiser Estvarav. Your fear of your father should be such that Leisaiser Estvarav, your father says, I want to do something, and you say no, or you say it's the wrong thing. Right? You say, I'm sorry, I think you got it wrong. Johnson wasn't president in 69. No, Dad, you were wrong. No, Abba. It says, Lo Seiser Estevarov. The Gemara says, continues, Hareisha Aviv over al Devrei Torah, even if his father's over al Devrei Torah, al Yoimalai, you shouldn't tell him, Abba, avart al Devrei Torah, it's against the halacha. El Yoimalai should say, Abba, there's a pasuk in the Torah that says so-and-so, and then the father should figure it out. But you don't disagree. It's an American thing to disagree. So the question is, how could Yosef here say, Loichein Avi, when it's next against the Gemara in Kedushin of Aflamid Beis, and Halacha Psuka in Shulchan Aruch, I believe it's in Simon Reish Mem or Reish Mem Aleph in that zip code. Kol Tov, this is our riddle of the week.
We have the honor of having with us, from Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Avrohom Steinberg, who is the Mechaba of 6 volumes, Refuah Halacha. He also, in English, 3 volumes, Jewish Medical Ethics, which originally came from Lashon Kadish. It was 6 volumes. He's both a Rav, he's a Musmach by Rabbi Nechemia Goldberg. He's also a pediatric neurologist. He's the head of the ethics in Shaarei Zedek Hospital. He's also the head of the Talmudic Encyclopediia. Wow. Such an honor to have somebody with, today's version of the Rambam.
Much exaggerated, but thank you.
So, Rabbi Steinberg, let me ask you your area of expertise. Let's say you're a doctor, you became a doctor in the United States, you're working in a hospital, and you're asked by the hospital to perform an abortion, right? They call you in, they say, Mrs. So-and-so is here, we need a surgeon, could you do the abortion in the operating room 3? What do you do?
So it depends what the reason for abortion is. There are certain circumstances where abortion is halachically permissible, and if I look into the chart, or if it's my patient, I'm not a gynecologist, but assuming I'm a gynecologist or an obstetrician, and according to Halacha, that is an option to do, and this is what the woman chose, then obviously I would be permitted to do. If it is, however, violating Halacha, then I think, I'm not familiar with the laws in every state in the United States, but there are many states that have what's called a religious exemption, which means that if I, based on my religion, my conscience doesn't let me perform an act, then I can stay away from the case, and someone else that the hospital will appoint will do it. In other words, in democratic countries, in many of them, on the one hand, a patient has the autonomy to choose what he wants to be done with himself within the framework of the law, but an individual physician or nurse have their own autonomy not to do something that violates their conscience. So the hospital, on the one hand, will be responsible to fulfill the autonomous wish of the woman, which is legally acceptable, but individually, I will not be the messenger to do it.
Now, Rabbi Steinberg, let's assume you're in a state that doesn't afford the doctor this luxury, but says we don't have the autonomous option, and we're requiring you to do it. What does the doctor do then?
Well, if it goes to do an act of abortion outside of halacha, which is actually an act of retzicha, obviously I'll have to resign.
Okay. It would not be permissible. Now let me ask you...
By the way,
yeah.
There are other participants in an act like abortion. There's the ultrasonographer that makes the diagnosis, which leads the woman to ask for abortion. There's the anesthesiologist that puts the woman to sleep. He doesn't do the act of the abortion, but he certainly is a messiah. It's not a lifnei iver because there can be others that could do it, but he's certainly a messiah. Here there are opinions that if the alternative would be to fire the person and he won't have parnose, then according to some opinions, he would be allowed to participate
right.
in it.
You're referring, I believe, Rabbi Steinberg, you're referring to the Netziv in Meishiv Davar,
right,
in Chelik Beis, in Melamed Aleph, where he says that there's no din Messiah where it would cause you a loss of parnassus. Is that correct?
Right.
Which
and
by the way...
there are other Kohenim in our day and time that really speak specifically about such acts. But the physician who is doing the act of Retzicha, obviously he can't do it.
Now, what would you do, Rabbi Steinberg, if a non-religious patient, or religious regardless, or non-Jewish for that matter, signs a DNR, do not resuscitate, but halachically has to be resuscitated, but legally shouldn't? You have that conflict. What do you do?
Well, that is a much more complex question, because the abortion is either you do it or you don't do it, either it's permissible or not. That's quite clear according to most poskim. DNR order is a sheval tas, assuming that they don't ask me to do an act, such as withdrawing a respirator But if it's withholding further treatment, which is not an act of retzicha, it is an act that maybe violates lo tamod al dam recho, not more than that, because I'm not doing anything. The patient is dying of his disease, not because I did something to kill him. In this situation, b'shev al ta'aseh, if it is a DNR that makes sense to the patient, and there are poskim who would agree with it, although it might be a matter of machloikes, then I can decide not to do it. And now, again, it's similar to the anesthesiologist or the ultrasonographer, that I'm just sort of a messiah to him to fulfill his wishes. So I don't think that this should lead necessarily to getting me fired for this reason. But again, if the request is either to do euthanasia like in Holland where they kill, or in Canada the physician is killing the patient on his request, or in several states in the United States where the physician is allowed to assist the patient to commit suicide, that would be something that I wouldn't do even if I have to resign or to be fired. And again, I'm saying that in most democratic countries that would be excused, and if I know the halachas, I know when to ask for it, and then I think there won't be a conflict.
Okay. I'm sure you're aware of the tshuva from Rabbi Steinberg, as well as my uncle, Rabbi Shmuel Baruch Werner, where they write about the concept of patient-assisted suicide in the case of where the patient is an Eina Yehudi, and for moral reasons, or from both medical and moral, they believe that assisted suicide is legal in that case, where they both opine that if it's an Eina Yehudi, you're allowed to, because under the Zayin Mitzvah B'nei Noach, right, there is no Isser Retzicha. A guy would not have a problem doing it because their Isser Retzicha is different from our Isser Retzicha. You're aware of that, I imagine, right?
So that tshuva, I don't know about your uncle, but the tshuva of Moshe Sternbuch was to Johannesburg. There was,
right. He was the director of the hospital in Johannesburg.
Right. Who asked this shaila as a policy.
Right.
Now, the answer is that there's a similar answer by Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach concerning brain death. If they define for themselves that this is not an act of retzicha, then actually it falls into the category of dinim, of the Sheva Mitzvot Noach.
Right.
And dinim, they're allowed to have their own dinim, unless it's so clear that no one can accept. For instance, if their din will be that you can go out in the street and shoot the first person that you meet, that will be a retzicha even by their criteria.
Yeah.
But if they're defining differently the moment of death, or they're defining differently the way a patient can get out of this world, then my acts are really not begeder retzicha of a non-Jew, but more of begeder dinim, which they're allowed to use. These are some of the...
So based on that, let me ask you, Rabbi Steinberg, the following question. You have a Jewish patient who's in great pain, whatever the case may be, for whatever different medical reasons, you could tell us better than I could, really would like to be put to death, would like to have his breathing device removed, whatever the case may be. Would you, as the head of a hospital, feel comfortable asking a non-Jewish physician, say, look, could you, I'm the director, Dr. McGillicuddy, we have a patient, Mr. Friedman, in Bunch 3. He's in great pain. Can you please disconnect him? According to this, Reb Shlomo Zalman, Reb Sternbuch, etc., would you feel comfortable doing that or no?
No, because if the patient is a non-Jew as well, and the physician is not Jewish, and according to the law of the land, this is not regarded as tzricha, then it's fine. But if you mix it, either the physician is Jewish or the patient is Jewish, they have to follow our definitions.
But I don't agree with that, Rabbi Steinberg, because a guy's issa to kill a yid is not because of loy sirtzach, but it's because of the Zayin Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. and his Zayin Mitzvahs B'nai Noach allow him to kill the Yid under this situation, or to disconnect the device under this situation. He has
right.
no... So why can't he do it?
That is on the part of the physician, but that is not on the part of the patient.
Right.
The patient
so the patient,
is Jewish.
The patient is comatose. The patient is not aware.
It doesn't matter, but I am not allowed...
But the Goyish doctor is not mechuyev for the patient. He's doing his chiyuv, and his chiyuv allows him to disconnect him from the respirator.
Yeah, but I think that if the patient is Jewish, no matter if he wants it or doesn't want it, he is mechuyev not to be in a situation where there is a tzicha according to his criteria, which is Halachik criteria.
This is a person who signed it. He's now in a coma.
It doesn't matter. He can't sign something.
Can the doctor? I don't mean that, but does the Goyish doctor have any issa to pull the plug?
No, the Goyish doctor doesn't have an issue.
Okay, so then why
had an issue to request it, and that request is invalid halachically because he cannot ask for such a thing.
Okay,
and therefore we should protect him the way we understand his life, his Jewish life.
But I miss you. But for you as the director to tell the Goyish physician to pull the plug, you are not doing it. The doctor is not doing an isser. So since he's not doing an isser, you're not a messiah. You're not a lifnei iver. So what's the problem?
No. First of all, it doesn't work that way. A director of a hospital doesn't give orders of removing respirator or not. This is always between the patient and the physician. The question from Johannesburg was, as far as I remember, I'm not at the moment in this particular Shaarei, but the question was put by the director of the hospital because there was such a policy, not because he was supposed to give an order to do it or not. In no hospital that I know, a director of a hospital gives an order between a patient and a physician. These are things between them. He can give the directives or the general rules in this hospital. Should the rules be this way or another way? But individually, it's always between the patient and the physician. When does the director come into the picture? When the patient wants something and the physician says, I can't do it for conscientious reasons. Then the director has to find someone else who will agree, but he can't give him an order to do it.
But Rabbi Steinberg, bottom line is a Goyish doctor does not have any Halachik problem pulling the plug on a Jewish patient who has allowed it, right? Assuming that it's legally whatever it's considered a conscientious thing, right?
That part is clear. That part is right.
So my question to you is: would a Jewish doctor be able to say, "Listen, I can't do it. Ask Dr. McKillicuddy to pull the plug"?
Yeah, he can do it if this doctor is not Jewish and the patient is not Jewish.
But if the patient is Jewish, what does it matter? The patient is comatose at this point. The doctor is a guy who's doing nothing wrong. So what's the problem?
No, so I'm saying the problem is that I cannot do something for the patient when I think it's the same with abortion. Even if the woman wants an abortion, I can't do the abortion because I think that it is wrong not only for me but also for the patient.
But the Goyish doctor is allowed to do it, even though the patient is Jewish.
Right.
Even though the patient shouldn't have signed it, but he did sign it, and now the doctor's saying, "Look, for me, it seems like the right thing to do, so I'm going to do it."
Right. So what I'm saying, I think that from the doctor's point of view, from the policy point of view of the country, which is not a Jewish country, that is okay. But if the patient is Jewish, to apply it on him is wrong, because according to the Jewish patient's position, whether he wants it or doesn't want, if I am to decide, I don't want to do an act that he is committing an act of murder, halachically. I don't think that would be right. I wouldn't do it. Maybe someone else would do it, but I understand your point, but I think that...
You see, but even for the Jewish guy to do it, the argument is when he's allowing it, he's allowing the doctor who's allowed to do it the ability to do it. So it's sort of like it's a very strange situation. He's not allowed to kill himself, but he's allowing the doctor who is allowed to kill him because according to the doctor it's not considered Ritzicha to do it. So is in such a case Ritzicha Asa? Would that be considered a Ma'abed Asmer Ladas when he's allowing somebody else who is allowed to do it the permission to do it?
Yes,
very
because
strange.
it doesn't matter how he committed suicide. He was not allowed to put himself into a situation
so he would not be allowed to sign. He would not be allowed to sign the DNR, but the Goyish, but the patient.
No,
but,
DNR, yes. DNR depends
well,
how you
okay,
define DNR.
Euthanasia, etc., where it's an act, but the doctor, but the Goyish doctor would be allowed to do it even to a Jewish patient. Yeah. So let me ask you another question. You've been the head of the ethics department of Shaarei Zedek. It doesn't get higher than that. Could you give us a few examples? Some halachic shilas that come out of from a doctor that collide halachically with what he's mandated to do legally, and how would you resolve those conflicts? Because we have many people listening. Many may want to go to medical school or be physicians. And what are some of the trials that you're going to run into if you decide to become a doctor?
Well, first of all, the issues of abortion and end of life are very important ones, and they occur quite frequently. But the most crucial question for an observant Jew to be a physician is Shabbos. That it comes every 7 days. You can't avoid it. And there is an inner conflict between not violating Shabbos on the one hand and treating the patient, which includes violations on the other hand. That is the major shaila that every Frum doctor has to resolve it to himself if he wants to be a Frum doctor. And that is not a simple matter, because everyone knows that Pikuach Nefesh is Doiche Shabbos, and if it's a situation of Pikuach Nefesh, so that you do it by Gdoile Israel, and you do it yourself, and you don't need a goy, and so on. Everyone agrees. The problem is that not every patient, even if he is in a hospital, is a Pikuach Nefesh situation, and not every situation that you treat a patient is necessarily a Pikuach Nefesh situation. And we paskin according to the Remo, not according to the Mechaber, even in Pikuach Nefesh situations, we have to try to lessen the severity of the issue, which means that a Frum doctor has to learn Hilchos Shabbos very well, has to know very well what is required from a medical point of view, from a legal point of view, and find the best ways to find the solution between the two. It's not as simple as it may sound. So, for instance, in Shaarei Zedek, that goes according, the whole hospital, the policy is to go according to Halacha. So we have goyim that assist us with writing, with putting on lights, with starting machines, with starting computers. These things can be done in a much, much lesser issue. Amira la'akum is mutar for even a chodesh she'ein bo skona. So that is the easiest way out. Sometimes it is not so easy because it's an emergency. In the emergency room, you can't wait for the goy to start to write, making mistakes and so on. In intensive care, you can do it. So there you are allowed to do things, even if they are not directly related to Pikuach Nefesh, but you have to know how to do it in a lesser issue. For instance, do it by shinui, do it by grama. There are all kinds of solutions that one has to learn. It's a really major issue for a Frum doctor. So that is, I think, the most important part for someone who wants to become a physician. By the way, purely halachically speaking, Isu Shabbos, even in Pikuach Nefesh, was only allowed to treat Jews. But obviously nowadays we treat non-Jews the same way, Mishum Eva and other reasons, and one should know that even in America he is allowed to do whatever is needed to save a life, no matter whose life it is. So that is something that the poskim nowadays clarified. But even for a Jew or even for a non-Jew, whatever you do, you should look for the lesser issue. When I trained in Einstein in New York, I did my pediatric neurology fellowship, so I had with me someone who wasn't Jewish, who went with me throughout the whole Shabbos and did for me things that halachically I should not have done it, or at least not lechatchila. I used a driver who is a non-Jewish driver to bring me to the hospital and back, and so on. So there are different solutions. There are solutions. It's possible. The fact is that there are many Frum doctors who went through it and are still going through it, but I think that is probably the most fundamental issue for a Frum doctor. Once we clear that, then there are many other issues in the hospital. The most frequently discussed issues are end of life, which we just now discussed, although in the extreme way, but there are routine things treating the dying patient which are very complex, and I get daily shilas from doctors, from families, from rabbis of the patient who are not well versed in the halachos of what are you allowed or not allowed to do for a dying patient. This is really, we can discuss it for 3 hours and not finish it. So there are a lot of there.
So Rabbi Steinberg, we don't have 3 hours, right? Like you alluded to, but give us your, if you had to pick the top 2 or 3, what would they be?
The top 3 most frequently asked questions are end of life, fertility shilas, and in a hospital sometimes triage shilas.
So give us, for example, start with fertility. Give us some of the more common.
Okay. So fertility issues are depending on, we talk about a non-fertile couple. It is either because the husband, the male, is infertile or the woman is infertile. Today there are solutions to both, but some of them are halachically not permissible. So we have to know what to do and what not to do. So for instance, if the male is infertile and then is a need for sperm donation, is it allowed altogether to get a sperm donation to this couple? And if yes, can you take it from a Jew or from a Goy? And these are questions that come up daily. If it has to do with the woman infertility, sometimes it's because...
You're referring to where they're looking for a sperm donor, you mean?
Right. Yes, if the husband doesn't have sperm...
So you're talking about the famous tshuva from Rabbi Feinstein, is what you're referring to, right? Yes,
so the machlok is between him and the Satmar Rebbe, whether you can get a sperm donor even from a Goy. From a Jew, everyone agrees that you can't take, because there's a chashash shema Yisach es achoisoi. The same sperm donor can donate 100 sperm donations. Halachically, each child born is his child. It doesn't matter if the child was born kederech kol haaretz or by donation, by sperm donation. He is the father, and if he's Jewish, he has 100 children who are his children, and if one marries another one, a boy and a girl that came out of his sperm, that causes mamzerus. So that is by all means not allowed. However, by a goy, there is no yichus, so there is no chashash shema Yisach es achoisoi, and therefore there is no chashash of mamzerus. That's why Moshe Paskin that b'shas adchak, if there is no other option, you can use a sperm from a goy. The Satmar Rebbe came out very strongly against it, found all kinds of chumras and isurim, and the machlokes continued further. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach held with Reb Moshe, the Minchas Yitzchak held with the Satmar, and so on. So we at Shaarei Zedek don't allow any sperm donation because it's problematic on any way. If it comes to the woman's side, she can be infertile either because she doesn't have a womb or she doesn't have ovaries and eggs. So you can either donate eggs to this couple if this is what is missing, or you can take a surrogate woman that she will carry the pregnancy from the egg and sperm of the Jewish couple. Now here it depends again who is the egg or the egg donor or the surrogate mother, is it Jewish or not Jewish? And then the major shaila of our generation is how do you define motherhood? Who is the mother if you split the function of the mother into two women? One is giving the genetic material, the other one is carrying the pregnancy and delivering. Now you have a child, who is his mother? Which has enormous ramifications. If one of the two is not Jewish, is the child Jewish or not, because it goes by the mother. Who can he marry? Can he marry a sibling from this woman or a sibling from that woman? Who is the Yarshening, this woman or that woman? To whom is the Mechuya Bekibud Em? And many, many other ramifications. And interestingly, the poskim are divided in every direction you can imagine. Reb Shlomo Zalman told me, and I went with him through all the sources that all the other rabbis quoted, either for the egg donor or for the surrogate mother. He refuted all these sources, and he told me that in his opinion, this is such a fundamental shaila that we don't have sources for, that until Mashiach comes, we can't solve the problem. However, it happens every day. There are many such children that are born either from an egg donor or a surrogate mother. So his solution was that both women are mothers lechumra. So that if either of the two is not Jewish, he needs a gir lechumra, and he can't marry either sibling of the, no matter who gave either the egg or the surrogacy, and so on, all the chumras that you can think about the fact that these two are women. Rav Elyashiv agreed with him, and to the best of my knowledge now, most Batei Dinim paskin that way. And here is a few complicating situations. For instance, if a boy is born from a non-Jewish egg donor to a Jewish woman who had the pregnancy and delivered. So at the 8th day, you do a milah, but do you do the milah as a Jew and it's a bris milah, or do you do the milah as a giur act, which the nafkemina is what brochas do you make? And you can't make both, because either you make a brocha ala milah or you make lamulis agerim. Either you say lachniso bevrisoy or you don't say lachniso.
But the brachas, you could make a milah without the brachas and you fine tune, or Rabbi Steinberg.
Right, but lechatchila, how do you do? I mean, this is discussed.
Rabbi Steinberg, right? Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So you obviously think that it's a real, that honestly, I went through the sugya at length, and if there are those who believe that it's not the donor mother, but it's the mother is the carrying mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to take the egg, if it would be medically, they would figure out how to take the egg of a cow and implant it in a mother, and the child would come out a little cow. You would think that this cow you should make a bar mitzvah for, could marry a Jewish person, etc.
And if it would vice versa, you take an egg.
I'm asking you, take an egg, you put it in a cow, a human egg, you put it in a cow, and they bear a child. You think that you could check the child and eat it for supper?
Right.
How could you possibly not believe that it's the egg that is the mother and it's the surrogate?
I don't understand. What do you prefer?
It has to be the egg. If you take the egg of a horse and you put it into a human, the child is not a horse.
Nothing will happen.
And
nothing will happen.
If it would happen, so you would make a mythos, and it would happen. So you would say, now the child is human? It comes out with 4 legs, with a mane, and it says giddy up, it runs. It's human. Or if you take the child of the egg of a human and put it into a cow or some other animal, and it bears it, and a human comes out, would you say the child is a cow? To me, it's absurd. How could you possibly say that it's not the egg that's the egg that decides what it is? Just like by sperm, the sperm donor is the father, regardless of what happens to him, right?
No, so I think you are mistaken by your assumptions.
Okay.
The fact that the Baal HaSperm, the Baal HaZera, is the father is halachically defined. That's a definition.
Right, but
that
and it makes sense
is acceptable,
too.
But
and it makes sense.
It may make sense, but for a woman, there is no halachic definition what makes her a mother. In most countries, the common sense is that the mother who has the gestation and delivering, she's the mother. That makes the most sense.
Good.
Who cares
so you
what the egg is?
But you were Makayim Hashlech Yhavchel HaGovernment. So I would turn to this government and ask them the same question. If the donor was a horse and the mother is a human, is the child a human because we looked at the gestating mother as the mother?
No, but that what you are presenting is impossible.
I understand, but
I understand. But let me explain a minute. Let me explain a minute. reasoning behind saying that the egg is the mother is because this is the genetic material of which the child will be born.
Right.
But today we know that the genetic material is only a part of the creation of the child, and the epigenetic, meaning the environment where the child is born, is as important as the genetics. So medically speaking, scientifically speaking, the gestational mother has a lot to offer to the creation of the child. The same reasoning that you are used to seeing.
So I ask you, Rabbi Steinberg, let me ask you a question. Do you believe, as a physician, that there will come a period, either in our lifetimes, in our children's lifetimes, where they will be able to take an egg, put it into some type of an incubation machine,
right,
where it will fully develop the egg and turn it into a child, the fetus, or rather the embryo, and turn it into a child? I believe that'll happen. Right?
And I don't.
Okay.
And I'll explain to you why. But okay, let's assume.
So we see that it's true that the gestation, the hotel, the mother who's carrying it, who's basically a pundik, she's a hotel, a full service hotel with food. Of course, the embryo wouldn't survive without that. That's obvious. But if a machine could do it, if a robot could do it, obviously at the end of the day, what decides what it is the DNA of the donor.
So that is from a scientific point of view. But you know, and I know, that a child needs both the father's genetic material and the mother's genetic material, right?
Right.
Yet, by halachic definitions, sometimes only the father counts, although the child was born 50% from the mother as well. For instance, a Kohen is only a Kohen if his father is a Kohen. If his mother is a Kohen, he is nothing. And vice versa. If a child is born to a Jewish mother from a non-Jewish father, he is a total Jew, not even 50% Jew. He is a total Jew. Why? Because halacha doesn't go exactly according to scientific definitions. Halacha goes according to halachic definitions.
No, but I don't agree with that.
And we need to find a definition.
I don't agree. But I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I think halacha does go according to science, but halacha says what defines Kohein is the father, not the mother.
Right.
What
but
defines
doesn't make sense.
But what defines Yadus is the mother and not the father.
But it doesn't make sense scientifically.
No,
why?
What do you mean scientific? We're not denying that the father is the father. We're just saying
we are saying that the child is a Kohen because of the father, although the 50% coming from the mother is a non-Kohen.
That doesn't matter. Why?
Why doesn't it matter? Because we define it this way, not because science makes sense here.
But it's not a contradiction. It's just like a country says, if your father is an American, even if your mother is not, it's enough to make you an American. Is that a steer to science? It's not a steer to science.
No, so exactly here, if motherhood would be defined halachically as the one that gives birth, so halachically a child will belong to the woman who
according to
gave birth.
So according to that, if you took the egg of a horse and you implanted it into a woman and a horse came out, according to halacha, the child should be human because it came from a human, which is absurd.
But if you take,
so I'm saying my point is halacha doesn't do things that are absurd. It could say, look, the decisive is this one, but if it turns into an absurd situation, obviously that's not the halacha.
No, it's not an absurd at all, because the example you give is impossible in nature.
But one day it will be possible.
No,
one day a computer. One day a
an incubator can be.
Incubator. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
one day
but not a horse or a human being. That can be.
But an
now,
incubator.
As far as an incubator, if there is no another component to define, then maybe halacha will indeed define it according to what is left to define. But here, it's not the situation. The situation is that there are two equally possible definitions by halachic criteria, and they are equally making sense from a scientific point of view. There's no stira. You can say that the gestational mother is the mother because without her the child can't be born, and she adds to the genetic makeup of the child. That we know now. It wasn't known a few years ago, but we know for sure that the epigenetics, the environment, has to do with the genetics itself. So it's not contradictory to science. It just has a problem that the two have components, that a regular child is born from a woman who has these two components, and here we divided it into two women. And then it's an open question by halachic criteria, who is the mother, and science can't decide it because there are points towards this side and points towards that side from a scientific point of view.
So I want to ask you one more important question, okay?
Okay.
Do you believe it's a mitzvah to become a doctor? The reason being, and obviously we're going into, there's a discussion about this. In other words, the Rambam was a doctor, the Ramban was a doctor. When somebody's a physician, basically their entire life's work is about doing a mitzvah, which is the Rambam writes it. You know, if there's a mitzvah, the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos, to save somebody's money, certainly there's a mitzvah to save their life and their health.
Right.
Do you believe that it's...
So that's a machloikes between Rav Herzog and Rav Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein says there's no mitzvah to become a doctor. Once you are a doctor, you are Mekai mitzvahs. And he gives an example from tzedakah. There's no mitzvah to become a gvir in order to give tzedakah. If you have money, you are mechuyev to give tzedakah. That is Rav Moshe's take on it. Rav Herzog says no. If there is fulfilling a mitzvah each day, and if there will be no mitzvah to become a doctor, who will fulfill the mitzvah of a doctor? So he thinks that becoming a doctor by itself is already a mitzvah. But I think that to me, it's a semantic machloikes. I think that each person should dwell into himself and see what is his best way to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. Some do it by learning all day long. Some doing it by doing tzedakah and chesed. And if you have a feeling that you can help people by being a doctor, I think you should be a doctor with all the difficulties for a Frum Jew to become a doctor and to serve as a doctor. And once you are a doctor, everyone agrees that each time that you are practicing medicine, you are mekayem a mitzvah. That's a din in Shulchan Aruch. The Gemara says, "V'rapo yerape mikan shenisna reshus leroife lerape." It's only a reshus. Says the Ramban, "Hay reshus mitzvahi." Why? Because there was a havamina that I shouldn't be a doctor at all. Because who am I to go against HaKadosh Baruch Hu's gzeira? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted this person to be sick, how can I, as a doctor, contradict his hashgacha pratis on this issue? But once we got the reshus to do, and the reason we got it is because we are not going against the Kodesh Baruch Hu, we are just his messengers to do what he actually wants. Therefore, if the part that maybe I wouldn't be allowed to be, I got the reshus, it becomes a mitzvah. Machlokas is if, like you said, if it comes from Vashevotalo, it's like returning a lost object, or Ba'afta l'recha kamocha, according to Rabban. There are all kinds of shittas. Where is the mitzvah? But certainly everyone agrees that a doctor, being a doctor, is mekayem a mitzvah all the time. The question you are asking is, in order for me to be mekayem the mitzvah as a doctor, I have to study to be a doctor. Is there a mitzvah already at that stage to become a doctor? So that, I said, according to Moshe, not. According to Rav Herzog, yes.
So let me do a follow-up. If a person wants to learn Torah his whole life, we're not speaking about that, gesundheit. A person has a choice. He could become an options trader, or he could become a doctor. One of them, he will be doing mitzvahs his whole life, and the other one, he'll be trading options his whole life. Yeah. Would you say that in that situation, you should say, look, you should really become the doctor because here you could do mitzvahs and here you don't?
Right. So I think that is the right outlook, but it has to fit the person. Someone can't become a doctor. He can't see blood. He can't deal with people. He has an aversion to infectious diseases. He can't. So you can't force him to become a doctor in order for him to fulfill mitzvahs all his life. So he has to find another job and combine it with learning and with tzedakah and with other things, and he'll be fine according to his destiny in the world. But if it's equal, this person can be either or, I think by all means he should prefer to become a doctor.
Rabbi Steinberg, it's an honor as always to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Bye-bye. Joining us from Lakewood, New Jersey, is Rabbi Dr. Daniel Roth, MD, who lives in Lakewood. He's part of the medical halacha PSAC group of the Beis Havad. He gives a shiur in medical halacha in Lakewood, weekly. He's a graduate of Yale Medical School. He's an ophthalmologist, a retina specialist. He's a professor, part of the faculty at Robert Wood Johnson. He's a musmach of Reb Pinchas Hirschsprung. Welcome, Reb Daniel.
Thank you so much.
So, medical halacha is your specialty. Let's go right into it. Somebody falls. I'm sure you have this all the time. A child falls. They need stitches. Well, stitches, wow. Of course you give stitches. What's the shaila? Well, it could be a big shaila. It could be a shaila of taifer. Could be shaila of kosher. And you're part of the Beis Havad. They come to you. They say, Rabbi Roth, Rabbi Dr. Roth, my kid fell. Do I bring him to Dr. Shanik to do the stitches? Or do I drive my kid to have Hatzalah take my kid to, or walk over to the closest doctor who's not an Eina Yehudi? What should I do, Dr. Roth? What do you tell them?
So this is, of course, a very common question that comes up, and it's something that happens on a routine basis, for better or for worse. Like you mentioned, the question of being taifer when suturing the skin together, whether taifer on the human body, taifer b'gufa adam, is a deraisa or only a derabanan, and Rosh Zalman is specific, but he basically comes out l'chumra, that one has to view it as a Torah prohibition and be chayshish for it. Rav Yashiv clearly paskin that way, that it is a chash of a deraisa. Nevertheless, there are mekilim that see it maybe only as a derabanan. Derabanan are also prohibited. So let's take a step back. If the wound is a deep wound and there's a risk for infection, technical halacha dictates that one can be mechal Shabbos to prevent an infection that can get deep into the tissues, lead to cellulitis, lead to more systemic illness, and even be a remote sakana. Even though it's not a likely sakana, it is nevertheless a sakana. However...
And let me interrupt, Dr. Roth. It isn't with the amount of infection, of death by infection in the United States, including in hospitals, staph infections, etc. This is not like a remote thing. True, it's not, first order of magnitude, but there is a real possibility. Is that correct?
Right, for sure. And usually the thinking is that if it's deep enough that it really needs stitches, unless it's just being put together for cosmetic reasons, if it's more than a quarter of an inch deep or depending on where in the body, then there's a concern that it could get infected. There's one caveat though, and it's also a factor. You don't need to do it within an hour. How long do you need to do this? So it's not as if you can do something and there's absolutely no downside and no detriment to the patient by waiting a number of hours, then you're not dealing with a sakana technically. It's there's no difference in outcome if you suture a wound, let's say now, or multiple hours later. What is that? How much time do you have? And that's the big question people often have. So there's been interesting studies that say that the golden period, pretty much any wound, you can wait at least 12 hours. Even some studies suggest up to 19 hours. So any wound on Shabbos, we're not talking about a wound that's so deep that's getting into body organs. We're talking about skin wounds, but we're not talking about a deep laceration that's going into the body cavity or where there's uncontrollable bleeding. Those have a sakana and need to be dealt with urgently. But if it's just a skin laceration, so waiting 12 or even longer hours is considered okay. And b'didi have uvda. I had years ago, my son was 5 or 6 and he was playing a game, closing his eyes, fell on some concrete, and gashed open his forehead. We were actually walking on our way to a Shabbos meal at some friends who invited us. This was shortly after we moved to Lakewood, and he fell on his head. We took him back. I took him back to the house. I cleaned up the wound. I put a tegaderm that I happened to have to just cover it and keep it clean.
What did you put on? What did you put on?
I put on like a tegaderm cover. It's like let's say it has it's like a plastic, or it could be a piece of gauze, but basically a piece of plastic that has adhesive around the edges to basically keep the wound clean. You can really put on anything that can keep the wound clean. We can talk about how to do that in a Shabbos friendly way in a minute. But basically, and Motzei Shabbos, I took him to the emergency room. We got a plastic surgeon. He was fixed up beautifully. Let me interrupt.
Let me interrupt. 2 questions, because I had too much information. So you're saying even in an area where it's a face, where if it's a boy or a girl, certainly a girl, the scarring could have severe repercussions. You're saying if it's done within a 12-hour period, it doesn't matter?
That's true. The face and the scalp for sure. The scalp is not such a cosmetic issue. But the face, even within 12 hours, is really a non-issue in terms of the cosmetics, assuming you can wash it out, keep it clean, and then it can be sutured clearly 12, probably even longer. So, during the day, it's never an issue. The only shiloh would come up if it's Friday night.
Go away. So let me just parcel this. Now, the shiloh, whether it's a deraisa taifer, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody comes out for sure it's a deraisa, because it's not mentioned neither in the Gemara nor in the Rishonim, to my knowledge, right? It's only a suffix. In other words, since there's a din of taifer by 2 begadim or by paper, we jump and we leap and we say maybe it's by skin as well. And over there, the problem is there's no clear delineation. In other words, on one hand, you could say by basar there is no din taifer. On the other hand, we do have, I know the Gemara in Habayna says that you have the problem of kaisev on basar, so maybe you have taifer by basar as well. So there's no clear delineation. But the plastic surgeon that you found, was he Jewish or non-Jewish? Because if he's non-Jewish, then it's only a shaila of amira la'akam. The question is, if you could have found a non-Jewish surgeon at that plastic surgeon at this point, at that point, are you better off waiting the 12 hours or not? Because amira la'akam even by chayla shein by sakana we do. So I'm just curious why you waited.
So let's take a step back. Number one, you have to get to the hospital. Getting to the hospital, I guess you could do it al yedei goy, but if there's absolutely no downside of waiting 12 hours, then there's really no tzad to be makel if it doesn't make a difference, just because somebody's nervous. There are 2 factors you're bringing up. One is the sakana of infection, and then you can maybe be mater a deraisa if necessary. And the poskim are worried that it may be a deraisa of taifer ba'adam. At least some of the poskim are choshesh for it. Rav Elyashiv for sure says you have to treat it as a possible deraisa. And Rav Shlomo Zalman also, even though Tzitz Eliezer and Rav Cheskel Abramsky and others are mekel, but it is clearly the Rabbanan.
But he's certainly in pain. He's certainly in pain. So to stitch it up, you assume relieves the pain, relieves the anxiety, Shabbai. So Drabanan would be mutter in this case, right? So why wouldn't you take him to a non-Jewish plastic surgeon?
So to take him to a non-Jewish plastic surgeon would be fine, but how are you going to get there? So you're going to go.
But even if you get there, you call up the local Uber, and you ask him to take you.
Right, so you have to call up with a shinoi, go into the car, which is fine with a non-Jew, and that would be mutter if you can do it that way. And that would be fine if it's a chayla shein by sakana, where you can do any malacha al yedei goy, or you can do a derabanan al yedei shinoi through Israel. However, as I said, that's only if there's real chayla shein by sakana. If he's in pain, and it's a child for sure, then you can do that. If it's an adult who's not in any significant pain, which is often the case, it's hard to justify when waiting will have no detrimental effect. But in cases where you have a non-Jew who's just as competent and can do it for you, there's definitely grounds. It should not be a problem for the sake of the chayla shein by sakana aspect to go and do it. For a Jew to do the stitches, though, is a big shaila, especially since it's almost never the case where, number one, during the Shabbos day, it's rare that you can't wait till Motzei Shabbos. And even if it's Friday night, it's typically possible to find a non-Jew. It's highly unlikely to be in a situation where a Jewish surgeon would be better than, would do a better job, and you can't find a non-Jew who can do a comparable job. There could be rare situations like that, but even so, that would not be a justification for the sakana. That would just be because you think the Jewish surgeon will do a better cosmetic appearance. That would not justify Chol Shabbos Deraisa of the Jew in that situation. So it's really there's never really grounds for.
So Rabbi Dr. Roth, in Lakewood, then the Frum doctors, as a rule, will not stitch a patient unless they feel that it could get infected and be a chayil shesh by sakana. Is that ultimately how they feel in Lakewood?
That's right. That would be the justification.
Unless they could find a Goyish, a non-Jewish doctor who could do an equal job. But you mentioned something in passing that I thought is interesting. It would seem to be problematic, even putting on, let's say, a butterfly Band-Aid. That could also be a shaila of
it's a shaila, but it's much less of a shaila. There's a dion about whether the butterfly, because you're not actually taking a suture and being for two edges together and making a knot. You're bringing skin edges together, and even though you can be madama to the paper being stuck together there,
right.
The paper being stuck together is you're gluing two things together. Here, you're just bringing with the butterfly or the bandage or the steri strip, you're bringing the wound edges together, and then the tissue itself is sealing itself. You're not putting the glue. So although there is a tzad to say that that's also a shaila, and if we can avoid a butterfly, and wait, it's better to avoid that too, especially if it's a Jew doing it. But in the case of need, most of the places say you can put on a butterfly and not worry about it.
Right. Now, let me just, Rabbi, Dr. Roth, let me just explain to the Olam what you're saying. In other words, taifer, when you glue two pieces of paper together, it's also taifer. The Rambam brings it, right? Gemara, etc. Right? In where is it? It's in like in Parakut Aleph of Shabbos. But here the difference over there, you're actually gluing it together. Here you're bringing the two sides together, and they grow together themselves. And there's no clear proof as to whether or not that has a din of taifer. In other words, it's hard to say it's not taifer is because you're not gluing them together. It's hard to say it is taifer is that there are many malachas that are done that you just set up the situation and then they happen by themselves, right? For example, Zairea, when you throw seeds in the ground, you're not making anything grow. You just plant it, and then the sun and the earth and the water make it grow by themselves, and that is still considered a malacha by Shabbos. So the question is taifer analogous to that or not? The answer is an unknown. But Rabbi Roth says that they're makil because of this. It's sort of another leap of faith. I guess we have a suffix whether taifer by basar, suffix whether this is called tzfir at all, and therefore putting on a butterfly then would you say the paiskim amater? That's what my takeaway is. Right. Is that correct?
Correct. And then there's another malacha, not with the butterfly, but with sutures, where there's the shaila of kosher. A kosher is making a knot, and you make knots in the suture. The counter argument is, but it's being removed. Typically sutures are left for anywhere from 5 to 14 days. If it's somewhere on the face, it's left for 5 to 7 days. If it's on the scalp, 10 days. On the upper extremities, 10 to 14 days. But so even though you're removing it, it's not shel kayama, and the only deraisa of kosher is a kosher kesher shel kayama. Some say that since when you remove the suture, you cut the stitch not at the knot. You don't untie the knot. You just cut the loop and remove it, and that knot stays in forever. So some want to argue that then that kesher is shel kayama because never being undone. So there is a shaila about kosher there, whether that's considered permanent or not permanent. But either way, it's a discussion. The poskim would make it a kesher shel kayama. But even so, it's
just for clarification for our audience, would you just tell them the two malachas, kosher and taifer, which would seem very close? Here you're using a string to knit two things together. Here you're making it out. What would be the difference? Just explain to them the difference between kosher and taifer.
The taifer is you're sewing at least two passes and sewing something together. And there, the malacha is in bringing the two items, let's say cloth or whatever it is, together through sewing. kosher, and you can be over on taifa without making a knot at the end. You can sew a bunch of passes, bring it together with a series of stitches without necessarily making a knot. That's taifa. Kosher is where you create a knot. It could be a knot if you tie something with shoelaces and make a permanent knot that you never take out, or you have a dress that has certain knots on it. It comes undone. You make a knot that's supposed to stay there forever. That could be a problem of kosher deraisa. When you suture a stitch,
there's taifa is between two different. You're attaching two different items
together.
Two items together.
Kosher is making a knot within. It could be two. You can have kosher on two different ends of a string that aren't necessarily the same. You can have two separate strings, but it's making an actual knot.
Okay, and another difference I believe is that taifa is where you're merging them into one entity. In other words, you're turning a few pages into a book. You're turning two skin sides into one, whereas a kshira, they always remain as two disparate entities, just connected through the kesher. That would be like a primary chilik between kosher and taifa, right?
Right.
Okay.
So with the kosher part, it's again a question whether it may be deraisa. But even so, you have taifa derabanan for sure. You have kosher derabanan in these cases. And again, if it's necessary, it's perfectly permitted to do this. It's hard to do with a shinui. If let's say it's not a sakana, or it's not a sakana to wait till after Shabbos, and you want to do it for cosmetic reasons, for anxiety reasons, for the choyle shein b'sakana pain of discomfort of having an open wound, then it would only be permissible to be done al yidei Yehudi through a Jewish surgeon if it's with a shinui. But often these cases, these wounds that need suturing are deep. And if they're deep, you can justify the argument that there's a sakana of infection. And if it's difficult to find a non-Jew to do it, then one would be allowed to suture it on Shabbos.
So let me get to just follow up what you just said. Now you have a question. Somebody falls, and it's more than, what did you say? How deep? A quarter of an inch deep?
Yes.
And now there's a chash of infection, and you don't want to wait to 10 hours to take them to the hospital, right? And you want to have it done immediately. So again,
when you say 10 hours, this is the big thing, because medically, if it's on Shabbos day, you can usually take them to the hospital Motzei Shabbos. The shaila really is more of a shaila, in my opinion, on Friday night. But if it happens on Shabbos day, I think it's very hard to justify a Jew doing malacha deraisa to suture a wound. Again, I'm not talking about a laceration that's penetrating the body deeply, where there's a shashtakana of penetrating organs or severe bleeding. I'm talking about a skin laceration.
But let's follow up on the new thought. Okay, now you have a case where it is a deeper cut, and you do have to worry about things. So
fine.
Now there's a Goyish doctor next door who could do it. Or there's a Frum doctor there's a Frum doctor in the house. Do you go looking for the Goyish doctor, or does the Frum doctor do it? Here in a case where there's a suffix of infection and you want to, you decide to do it. How would you respond?
So there's a typical halacha that we bring down that when we have the opportunity to avoid Chil Shabbos through a Jew, and we have a comparable outcome from a non-Jewish doctor, we prefer the non-Jewish doctor to do the malacha. And in a case where you have access to a non-Jewish doctor, even if it's a little bit of tircha, even if it's something that may cost a little bit more, it's preferable to have the non-Jewish doctor do the malacha. If there's a reason to think that they will not be as attentive, so sometimes there's a general discussion in the poskim. If you have a doctor that you can go to who's a Jewish doctor on Shabbos, whether it's a sakana or a non-Jewish doctor, so there's a difference of opinion whether you should go for the Jewish doctor and the non-Jewish doctor, because the Jewish doctor will, number one, take better care of the patient, he'll be more invested. That's the whole basis for Hatzalah, doing everything that they do on Shabbos, because they'll care more, they'll be more, they'll be more rapid in their responses. But if there's no urgency, minutes don't matter, maybe hours don't matter, and you have access to a non-Jewish doctor to do the malacha, and it's comparable in terms of the sakana, I think it's hard to justify going to a Jewish doctor unless you just don't have access to a non-Jewish doctor.
Okay, so wait. So does it make a difference if you're an Ashkenazi or a Sephardi?
So again, according to the, I mean,
I believe the Beis Yosef,
you're right.
The Beis Yosef holds that.
It's the Ramah that says it's better to use a goy. So technically,
right.
If you're a Sephardi, you'd have more reason to be able to be mekel and go with a Jewish doctor.
Yeah. So it's the Beis Yosef says that you always go with the
Jewish
Jew.
doctor. Right.
Yeah, and the Ramah comes along and he says no, we better to do it al yedei a goy. Now, interesting to note that the Taz takes up issue with the Ramah, and he brings in a new factor. He mentions a new factor. He says, first of all, they may not be as attentive, like the Rush says, but additionally, he brings in a new factor. He says, if we're going to it's better to go with the Frum Jew. He says, because this way it teaches people the importance of pikuach nefesh. Whereas if we start looking for a goyish doctor, then people are going to sort of make light of it, pikuach nefesh, and one time they'll get it wrong and the person will die. So he holds fakir. You should go with the Frum doctor.
Right. The difference with wounds, though, is that really you're no pun intending, you're going out on a limb to really see it as a sakana, especially if you can wait. So I think that I mean, I'm not talking about for Sfardim because Sfardim have the mechaber. But even the Taz's concerns are, again, many understand it is a limited disagreement with the Ramah in terms of for Ashkenazim. And when there's no urgency and it's not going to teach people to be negligent about sakana, I don't think if you find a non-Jewish doctor to suture your wound, it's going to be lead to negligence in sakana. I think also because so often it's a suffix whether there's even, like they say, that definitely in a case of suffix sakana, even the Taz would agree that one should use a non-Jew. So
so let me ask
suffix sakana. And
Rabbi, let me ask you a tough question. Let me ask you a tougher question, okay? Because this is why you earn the big bucks, okay? Now it's on a Friday night, and it's a suffix sakana. It's a deeper cut, and you can't wait to 12 hours or. So you have to do it. It's a Friday night. You would agree. You would do it. You would do it on. You would take her to the hospital or him to the hospital. And in the hospital, you come in, and there's two doctors, or the emergency room, and next door, a Frum doctor and a non-Jewish doctor, right? A Jewish or a non-Jewish doctor. And the Jewish doctor is a decent doctor. He's okay. And the Goyish doctor is okay. And the Jewish doctor is a really good plastic surgeon. So both will remove the sakana. One, the child or this little girl will have a scar on her face for life, and the other one, it will be invisible. Do you go with the Jew or the non-Jew?
In that situation, once there's a heter to go with the Jew, because it is a clear sakana, then you'd be allowed to go with the Jew. You see, there's a discussion in the Poskim, if you need 5 stitches to take away the sakana, but 7 stitches would make it look much nicer, can you go ahead and do 7? And many Poskim write that once there's a dechia and there's a heter to do it, you'd be allowed to go ahead and do the whole thing properly. Kind of, they bring a raya from Mila, if you can continue to do it if you weren't Pirish. The idea being that or the Magid Mishnah that some rely on, according to Sfardim for sure, that you could do all the needs of the chayla, even though we don't rely, Ashkenazim don't rely on that Magid Mishnah. But there's this concept that once you're doing it, you could do it the right way, the complete way. So one can argue that here, since it's mutter for the Jewish doctor to do it because it's a sakana, and there is a machlokes in Poskim where Ramosha says it's best to make the Jew should avoid being available even for sakana. There are others, like Rosh Zalman says, no, it's better for a Jewish doctor to be the one, if he's from, to take care of people with sakana. So that all being said, there's definitely grounds to rely on the fact that the Jewish doctor is not only permitted to do it, but maybe it's better for the Frum Jew to do it, and he'll know what to do and how to do, and he'll care more, and then he can therefore do a better job. It would be permitted to have him do it. But if things were comparable, it would be best to have the non-Jewish doctor do the surgery.
So you're saying that given that we have the Beis Yosef that says it's better to use a Jew in the first case, and even though the Ramah argues the Taz takes the size of the Ramah, and certainly in some aspects, you're saying in a case where it would scar the child or the adult and they're sensitive to it, then you should certainly be Saimach on the Beis Yosef and on the Taz who are matter it. And
right, when you say the Beis Yosef, you have to be careful because for Ashkenazim you can't rely on the Beis Yosef. But we have a Taz that you can rely on, especially if it's more of a significant sakana situation where it's definitely mutter for the Jewish surgeon or doctor to do the stitches. Then you can rely on that and then have him do it properly.
Right. Correct. Okay. Okay. Now let me sort of, let me switch topics a little bit. So you're in a hospital, or forget not in a hospital. You have a choice. You have a religious doctor. This is probably very common, right? And you have another doctor who's also Jewish, but he's not religious. Who is it preferable to use in a case, let's say, where there's a suffix sakana? The Frum doctor or the non-Frum doctor, who is Bechal Shabbos anyway?
So, in general, Ramesh has a tshuva. Ramesh Feinstein says that for a Frum doctor, it's best to make himself not available. And he should not be Bechal Shabbos, even for Jews, when there's comparable care being provided by others. Even, so that's talking about trying to have other non-Frum Jews, have other non-Jews. When it comes to a Jewish patient who's Frum versus a non-Frum Jewish patient, then they're both Jewish. So then the question is like this: the doctor, right? Sorry, you have a Frum doctor and a non-Frum doctor, both Jewish. So then the problem is that the non-Frum doctor will more likely do malachas. We're talking about a situation with definite sakana?
Well, there's a suffix sakana, or either way, you decide. It's either a suffix sakana or a definite sakana.
Okay, so the Tzitz Eliezer says it's preferable for the Frum Jew to do it because they'll be more careful to avoid the extra Chol Shabbos situations. And Rishon Zalman also says it's better for the Jew who will provide better care. The Frum Jew will provide better care than maybe the non-Frum person. But it depends on the competence. If there's a shaila of competence, then it's no shaila. You go to the one who's more competent, whether they're Frum or non-Frum, because it's a davar mutter. It's sakana, suffix sakana. Either one's allowed to do it. But the advantage of going to the Frum doctor is that he'll do only what's necessary. He won't just turn on lights, do a million other malachas that would not necessarily be necessary for the sake of the refuah, for the sake of the intervention or care.
Right. There's also the Beis Halevi. You know what I'm referring to, right?
Yeah.
The Beis Halevi says that if somebody can do, in other words, the doctor has to do it because he has a din of it's pikuach nefesh, it's Zayich Shabbos. But the Beis Halevi says a Kadish. It's based on a Gemara in Ksubis that somebody who would do the Isser, even if there's no Einus, they don't have the P'tur Einus. So whereas the Frum doctor would have the P'tur Einus, which is very debated. Many of the later Achrayim debate it, but it's certainly
right because if you have both kavanas, especially if you have both kavanas, so then
right, this is where the Yeshiva Shalamdas or Shmuel Rozovsky's Chakiris go live. Let me ask you another question. Can it, you're sitting and eating Shabbos by the meal. A guy comes in. My medical knowledge here is very limited, and his retina is detached, and you feel it's pikuach nefesh, and you run and you bring him to the hospital and you stitch it up. Can you send him a bill after Shabbos for the work you've done? So what's the chakira? On one hand, it's my Shabbos.
By the way, I just wanted to qualify. There's a long discussion, which we probably don't have time for now, about whether retinal detachment is a pikuach nefesh or not. But let's leave that one aside. Assuming you're talking about a case of a retinal. I'm
trying to get you involved in the case. I don't know how to get a retina specialist into a pikuach nefesh case. Yeah.
Well, it actually does happen. Let's say somebody comes and he has an eye full of pus and he's got an infection in the eye from recent cataract surgery, and otherwise it's a serious eye infection. It's a classic example of the Gemara that Ein Shemarda, whatever it is, and
Right.
it's Pikuach Nefesh. And now, can you charge him after Shabbos? So the question is, it's almost never that you're going to jump in there on Shabbos, never see him again before or after Shabbos. And since there's going to be care, the Havlah, with other components before or after, an interesting thing is every time we do a surgery, we get paid for the surgery with a 90-day post-operative period, meaning we don't bill for 90 days. It's all part of the surgical package. So that's a classic Havlah. It's not because of Shabbos, but anytime there are other elements to the treatment that come after Shabbos, then there's no problem of taking money because it's Havlah. However, if there's no way to do Havlah, you're coming in there, you're flying out after Shabbos, you're not going to ever see the patient again, someone else will take care of them, then many say one should not take schar because you're not allowed to take schar Shabbos. However, others say that you're allowed to take it because it's a schar mitzvah. In schar mitzvah, you're allowed to take schar for Shabbos. If it's a non-Jew, then the Chassam Sofer says you give it to tzedakah. Others say you shouldn't charge for it because it's a problem of taking schar Shabbos in that way.
Well, Dr. Roth, thank you very much for your time.
It's really a pleasure, and I appreciate your helping increase awareness of halacha in the community in Klal Yisrael. It's a wonderful thing.
Thank you so much. Kol tov. Bye-bye. Joining us from Eretz Yisrael, he lives in America, but he happens to be there now. We have Dr. Alan Kadish, who's a cardiologist. He's also president of Touro College and its 36 schools. And Touro is the largest educator in the United States in health sciences. They have 5 medical schools, 3 nursing schools, 5 PA programs, 4 physical therapy programs, 2 OT programs, 2 speech programs, 2 pharmacy schools, as well as a dental school, 600 to 700 Frum students in his health sciences. It's an honor to have you. Welcome, Dr. Kadish.
Thank you very much, David.
So, Dr. Kadish, right now, the only Frum medical school or dental school in the United States, in Israel maybe you have, is under the auspices of Touro. Is that correct?
It is true.
In other words, Yeshiva University used to have, obviously, Einstein, but until Richard Joel gave Einstein over to Montefiore, basically, so you are the only remaining from a school. So here's the question I'd like to ask you. Is medical school a good idea for a Frum Yid? And why do I say that? Besides the myriad of shilas that you have, you also have Shabbos. I happen to know a Frum boy, he became a doctor, and his father-in-law said there's no more Shabbos in his house. Because after you go out 50 times for Shabbos, suddenly traveling on Shabbos, getting into your car on Shabbos becomes almost meaningless. So talk to us about how slippery a slope of his Shabbos, his halacha, and juxtaposing that with, the Rambam was a doctor, the Ramban was a doctor, you're obviously talk to us about that.
So first of all, Jewish physicians is not something new. It's not a davar chadash. There's a long history of Jewish physicians that goes back, of course, to the time of the Gemara, but what people perhaps don't realize is that during the Middle Ages in Europe, in many communities, 30 or 40% of the physicians were Jewish. And of course, that at that time, pretty much everyone within the Jewish community was shomer mitzvahs. And so physicians for millennia have figured out a way to incorporate being a physician with being a Frum Jew. Now, in some ways, there are some challenges that have become more difficult, and so it is a very important and very relevant question. I'll try to answer the question about Shabbos first in a number of ways. First of all, not every physician has to work on Shabbos once they're fully trained. We'll talk about training in a moment. But once you're fully trained, there are certainly many things that physicians can do if one chooses not to have to work on Shabbos. And of course, in cases of pikuach nefesh, it's absolutely mutter to take care of patients on Shabbos. Some would argue that it's a mitzvah. But there are things that a physician can choose to do and ways you can organize your practice so that you can have little or no time on Shabbos that you have to work. Secondly, the mitzvah of taking care of people, particularly in cases of pikuach nefesh, is one that's dramatic, important, and has a lot of upside to it. I can't tell every individual how to trade that off against the possibility of being called on Shabbos to take care of someone who's seriously ill. It's a personal lifestyle choice in my mind, not a halachic issue, because as I mentioned, there's a long history of the Gedolim you mentioned, as well as many others, of being able to incorporate being a physician with a Shomer Shabbos lifestyle. I talked a little bit about training a moment ago. The situation for medical students is a little bit more complicated because when you're a medical student, you don't have the primary responsibility for saving someone's life. There are always physicians who supervise you. And that's why at Touro and at some other medical schools, it's possible as a medical student not to have to work on Shabbos or Yontif.
But Dr. Kadish, in a regular medical school, you would have to work on Shabbos?
Unless you can work out a special arrangement, you would have to work on Shabbos.
And how hard is it to work out a special arrangement? I got into, I don't know, give me a medical school. Rutgers Medical School. Well, Rutgers is in the New York area. They may have sensitivity. I got into the University of Southern California Medical School. Will they make a program for me?
Probably not. That doesn't mean that it can't happen.
If not, am I allowed to then go to medical school? If I know I'm going to be working on Shabbos to train, and I'm going to have to be Mechal Shabbos.
Well, you won't necessarily have to be Mechal Shabbos as a medical student. You may not have to engage in documentation. You can live within walking distance of the hospital. You can walk around and learn without necessarily being Mechal Shabbos.
I mean, can you take notes? Can you take note at a bedside of a patient without writing?
So as a medical student, you may not need to do that. You may be able to, particularly as a third-year medical student in the rotations, you may be able not to have to write because, again, you're not the primary person who's responsible for taking care of the patient.
So, Dr. Kadish, when you say you may not, like, if somebody were to ask me, David, I want to start trading options, and I tell him you may lose money. I mean, you may lose money is a pretty high likelihood that he's going to lose money. So what is you may? I mean, if we assume that Chil Shabbos is a very serious thing, and there's no heta to do it as a medical student, we'll talk about the Noida Behuda later. But let's assume for a moment there's no heta. When you say you may, is it like a 2% chance you may not have to write, or is it a 99% chance? Define that a little.
I think that even in places which won't let you be off on Shabbos, there are probably ways to avoid writing.
What about other Isurim?
I'm not a posek. I don't want to say anything definitively. I think walking around on rounds without writing and learning, one could make a reasonable case that could be potentially mutter.
What may you encounter as a student in the third year or second year as a student that may be problematic for Shabbos, besides writing?
Are you able to get from place to place without taking an elevator? Might depend a little bit on how far the distances are and what the system is. Can you live in walking distance from the hospital? All those are potential dangers.
You will have to work on Shabbos. You will have to work on Shabbos as a second, third year resident. That is something that's clear to you?
Well, so a medical student is different from a resident. As far as a student is concerned, as I said, it's possible you could work something out. It's possible you will have to come in and do rounds.
Okay, so in Touro, what you do is that medical, while you're a student, you don't have to do anything that would bring to Chil Shabbos. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you have a Rav like who paskins these things?
We have a group of Rabbanim whom we consult when there are complicated issues, but many of these issues have been worked out over time, and we're able to arrange schedules so that students who are Frum don't have to work on Shabbos. The only other thing I was going to talk about was training as an intern and resident. We do have Shomer Shabbos programs in pretty much every specialty. You mentioned the Yehuda before, but for residents, because you are a physician and because you may be responsible for integral parts of care of patients, there may be more heterim as a resident to work on Shabbos, under the guise of pikuach nefesh.
There was just for our audience, the Rabbi Yehuda that I'm referring to was asked a question about doing autopsies during an outbreak of some type of a plague in London. And so somebody said, can they do autopsies? So Rabbi Yehuda Paskin, and it's a shayla that's used not only in the area of autopsies, but in greater halacha, he says he defines pikuach nefesh as something that is immediate and at hand. In other words, he says, if we're just going to define future pikuach nefesh as pikuach nefesh, one day I'll save a life, he said, then you would be able to go to medical school on Shabbos and be mechal every part of Shabbos because one day I'll save a life. So he says, we don't see futuristic pikuach nefesh as pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh has to be something. So he says, for example, if the plague is ongoing and by doing an autopsy on this patient, you'll be able to save the patient in the other room, that's called pikuach nefesh. And the Chazon Ish enlarged that. He says not only does it mean somebody in the same room, but it means somebody in another city or in another, but the disease is here at hand. So what that means is that somebody going to medical school is obviously not called pikuach nefesh. But Dr. Kadish is saying a resident who's actually practicing, he may actually save somebody's life. Is that a fair synopsis, Dr. Kadish?
Absolutely.
Okay. So is one of the reasons you opened up or you created a Shomer Shabbos residency because of all the halachic problems, or school is because of all the problems, halachic problems of going to school?
So regarding the school, absolutely. We want to create an environment for Frum students to be able to learn medicine and not worry about halachic issues. And in general, it's been highly successful. We have Frum students who are able to be comfortable. And for residency, there are potentially heterim, as we talked about, but some people choose to not have to worry about that and would prefer to avoid the issues you raised at the beginning of the conversation. Say, I want to be home with the family on Shabbos. And there are residencies that will allow you to do that in almost every field.
Dr. Kadish, could you give us 5 or 6 examples of, by creating a program for Frum people, of halachic problems that had previously existed that because of the Frum program you've managed to solve? Give us, because most of our listeners would have no idea what they are. List them.
So you've raised, I think, what is in many cases the biggest issue, which is Shabbos for students, for residents, and for practicing physicians. And as a student, where there are many more halachic issues, we're able to completely avoid those issues by having students who don't work on Shabbos. And I think that's something extraordinarily important to make people feel comfortable becoming physicians. A second set of issues relates to end-of-life care. And those are very complicated issues, particularly as some of the ethos in Western medical ethics has diverged from medical halacha. The most obvious principle behind that is the question of patient autonomy. In Western medical ethics, patient autonomy is paramount. In medical halacha, while some poskim value patient decisions in certain situations, patient autonomy is not the most important value. The most important value is preserving human life, a gift which Hashem has given us, and something which we have a mitzvah to preserve. So one example that I encountered in my practice of the issue of end of life and how to deal with patient autonomy is whether one could turn off a pacemaker. Pacemakers are devices that are implanted that keep the heart functioning. And in many cases now, Western medical ethics, surprisingly, allows one to turn off a pacemaker even in situations where the patient may not survive and you pretty much know that the patient may not survive if you turn the pacemaker off. So I was faced with a situation where the patient's family insisted that a pacemaker be turned off. The halacha is very clear. One is not allowed to do that. I was able to navigate that situation, fortunately, in a way that made everybody feel comfortable. But in our medical schools, we would step in and make sure that students and residents who are faced with that kind of a situation would be able to adhere to medical halacha and not run into situations where, God forbid, there was a question of actually murdering someone. And so there are end-of-life issues, there are issues that have to do with abortion, there are other issues where we're able to step in and protect students and residents from situations such as that. It's not always easy. There are many complexities, but it's another set of issues that's extremely difficult to deal with because it's a case where medical halacha and Western medical ethics diverge from each other. Another potential example has to do with training Kohanim. There are differences of opinion about whether a Kohein can be a physician. Many Kohanim to become physicians or dentists. There are plenty of opinions to rely upon. But the place it gets more complicated is training again, because when you're working with cadavers in an anatomy laboratory, which is an essential part of the medical and dental curriculum, it's not the situation that you referred to of cholo lefanenu, where there's a sick person in front of us. And therefore, it's not a situation where there's a heter for a Kohein to work on a cadaver. So we have developed a couple of solutions for that. In some of our schools, we actually have a particular viewing area where Kohein, not being part of an OL, not being part of the same building, quote unquote, in halachic terms, can observe things. And we also have 3D holograms which can teach anatomy. So we're able to teach anatomy to a Kohein, have them get through medical school, and then become a practicing physician where, as I said, although there is some halachic disagreement, there are many poskim who will allow a Kohein to function as a physician once they're done with training. And we've been able to set up a system where Kohanim are able to get that training without being in the same room as a mace.
So you ran through a bunch of topics. I want to go back. First of all, when you create these programs, where, let's say, the Frum guys don't go to work on Shabbos, do you create Ava because those who work on Shabbos say, hey, wow, this is fantastic. They have a get-out-of-jail-free card. They have off weekends. How do you deal with the potential antagonism it creates with those who do now have to work on Shabbos?
So for medical students, it's usually not a big issue. The medical students are always happy to learn. I can't say that anything's 100%. It's during residency where things are more complicated, and generally what happens is people who are in Shomer Shabbos residencies more than make up the hours by working on Sundays and on other days. And so in a reasonably large program, schedules are able to be created which minimize those issues. You can never say 100%, but schedules are able to be created which minimize those issues.
In other words, there are people that don't want to work on Christmas and New Year's and President's Day and July 4th, and they make it up on those days, basically.
They make it up on those days. They work every Sunday, and it generally is a schedule is generally possible that doesn't disadvantage the other residents while allowing the Shomer Shabbos residencies to occur. It's more of a challenge in small programs. Some subspecialties have small programs, but in general, one is able to do that.
Now, let me go to the Kohein issue. I mean, the issue that you discussed about a Kohen becoming a doctor, Ramosha and Yeridech Elegimel is really very sharply critical of it because there's a problem of being metame lames for a Kohen. And
Right.
even though today all our Kohanim are anyway Tameh, but there's a concept of Tumah B'chiburim, where you're Moisef on the Tumah, etc., where, so, which Kapaskin Shulchan Aruch, etc., there's a problem. So Ramosha was very sharply critical. So your basically position is, you're saying, is that Ramosha is critical of learning because at that point it's not Pikuach Nefesh. So what you've done is you've created a situation where while learning, they don't have to be Metame, and they only have to be Metame once they're physicians, and there is a real instance of Pikuach Nefesh. Did I say that correctly?
So look, when you're in training or when you're doing an autopsy or when you're in an anatomy laboratory, a Kohein has to intentionally be Metame himself.
Right.
And that's what we've been able to avoid. When you're a Kohein who's practicing, if you're in an office practice, for example, it's very, very rare that someone will actually die in your office. So you're not.
What about if you practice? You're going to have to practice in a hospital. I mean, there's a morgue in the hospital. Doesn't that create problems?
So in some cases, a morgue may not be in the hospital. But my point is, you're not intentionally being metame in a situation where you're putting yourself in the same room as a mace. It may happen accidentally if somebody passes away, but the morgue may often be in a different building. And if someone passes away, it's an accidental thing where you're not intentionally being metame yourself. And I have heard that some people make the distinction between being in a situation where you know you're going to become tameh, where it's a vadai, versus a suffix where, yes, someone may die. People die in hospitals. But that's different from being intentionally metame. We haven't talked about Rav Goren Shita, who disagrees with Rav Moshe and says that once a Kohen is tameh, there's no further issue. That is a das yachid. But there are other heterim, again, because a Kohen is not being intentionally metame himself in those circumstances.
So I don't know about Rabbi Goren, but there is a Shita Yechidi, the Ravid in Hilchos Nazir, says that Bizman Hazeh, since the Kohanim are already Mechulalim V'Aimdim, there is no, you can't add on. He doesn't hold that Tumah B'Chiburim would create a problem. It's a Shita Yechidi.
Right.
Additionally, that is, but it's one out of 50 Rishon. It's really a das yachid, but they are mitzarefit as a sniff for spexfakis. But there is, just to go on the record, there are those who hold that there's no tumas meis by akum, and today that kaihanim are safek kaihanim. So there are those who use these rigged quote heterim, but it's certainly not mainstream halacha. It's certainly not So you're saying, but the way you've created it, you've done it where a kohen does not have to be metame while he's in school, and once he's already a physician, then already it's a suffix. Will he be metame, or he can go into practices that don't require tzum at all? I mean, if he becomes a dermatologist, he's rarely going to come into the problem of a tzum. Is that correct?
That's correct, and actually changes in the medical delivery system have made it easier because most hospitals now have hospitalists. You see, it used to be that if you were in an office practice and your patient was admitted to the hospital, you had to see the patient in the hospital. That system is changing, where there are people who are full-time working in the hospital as hospitalists, and the office physicians don't actually see patients in the hospital. So it makes it easier for a Kohen not to expose herself or himself, I should say, to those situations.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions, Dr. Kadish, that feel free to say that you can't respond, okay?
Sure.
But this is why I earned the big bucks here, okay? So you had 5 medical schools, nursing schools, all these schools, right? You're the individual most responsible for health sciences in the United States as a single person, which means inevitably in your schools they are dissecting bodies, right, to use body parts for studies. Right? And they're doing it under the auspices of Touro, under the direction of Touro. Dissecting bodies, as we said from the Noida Behuda, could be very problematic because if there's it's no pikuach nefesh at the time, and you run into problems of nibul hames. So my question to you is as authorizing all these, dissecting of body parts, using them for studies, how do you, as a Frum organization, juxtapose that together with common psak, which wouldn't allow it?
So it's a complicated situation. The first, and again, I'm not a posek. What I can tell you is that we've relied on poskim who said that it's okay. Remember that in the United States, of course, the majority of bodies are not Jewish, and the halachos may be different in that circumstance.
Okay. So what are the challenges? If you had to say, we have people listening and they want to go to medical school, like what other challenges are they going to encounter as Frum people? I mean, we spoke about Shabbos. We spoke about, I guess, a little bit DNR, right? But
Correct.
but you're a physician. You've been doing this for decades. And what are they? Somebody has a father, and he says, "Look, your kid's going to go to school, and he's going to run into these and this and this. What problems haven't we discussed?"
So, one thing we haven't discussed is actually not a problem, but the fact that there is the opportunity for tremendous Kiddush Hashem in doing this. And I mentioned the long tradition of Jewish physicians. There is a reputation of helping people that can be very positive. Obviously, no human being is perfect. People always make mistakes. But if you act as a physician and act in a very caring way, it creates a situation where Frum Jews are viewed positively and perhaps in contradistinction to some of the things that people read about. The venues, they save people's lives, they help families, and they can really do a tremendous amount of good, not just for individuals, but for Klal Yisrael in general through the positive image. So before we talk about challenges, I wanted to be sure that we recognize the fact that there is a tremendous sacrifice on individuals' parts because it's hard work and tremendous responsibility and can occasionally create problems with Shabbos and things like that. But there's also a tremendous upside to being a Frum physician and a long history of Frum physicians contributing positively in many ways.
Can you give us an example of your life's experience where you've seen where a Frum physician created a Kiddush Hashem? Or positive feelings, for that matter.
So there are many circumstances where I've been asked by patients if I'm Jewish, seeing me, and where they, I wouldn't say express surprise, but expressed admiration that as a religious Jew, that I have acted in a way which has helped them. And particularly when outside of New York, where there aren't as many Frum physicians, I practiced in Michigan and Chicago. Sometimes it was a surprise to them, and it often created a sense of and knowledge about Judaism that they didn't have before. And it was both gratifying personally, and I think something that people see as being very positive when a physician helps save their life or helps a loved one. And it's happened many times. As I said, in some cases, people didn't encounter that many Jews who they viewed as helping other people because there weren't that many Frum Jews around, and this changed their mind and their impression of religious Judaism. There are organizations that do a tremendous amount of good, run by Frum people in healthcare, ambulances, transplant organizations, in addition to physicians, that create a very positive image for Frum Jews and a positive image about what Frum Judaism can be. The other thing that I would say is that many Frum people in a variety of sensitive fields feel much more comfortable with a Frum healthcare provider. And in order to provide care to those people who will feel uncomfortable, for example, discussing personal issues, discussing psychological issues with someone who's not Frum, we need from physicians and from healthcare providers to be able to take care of the community in a way that makes them feel comfortable. So if a frum person is having psychological issues where emunah may be involved, they may be very uncomfortable speaking to a psychiatrist who's not frum. If there are issues that have to do with having children, they may feel very uncomfortable dealing with a fertility specialist who's not frum. In those circumstances, training from physicians, it's not just an issue of taking care of the individual in their own career choice, but it's an issue of serving the frum community in a way that they feel comfortable. And that's why we feel that training physicians and other healthcare providers in every field is a crucial part of our mission to provide the kind of care with sensitivity and understanding of halacha and understanding of the emunah that people in our community feel, dealing with someone who understands those issues and can relate to them.
Dr. Kadish, it was an honor to have you on with us. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure as always. Thank you, David.
Take care, Colton.
Take care.
Joining us from Cleveland, Ohio, is Dr. Louis Malcmacher. He's the head of the Hebrew Academy of Cleveland. He's also a physician in Cleveland, a dentist. He's a Talmud of Yeshiva Rabbi Yitzchak. Welcome, Dr. Malcmacher.
Thank you, David. It is a real pleasure to be with you, and I'm a huge fan of your show and also your svarim. I think they're fantastic. So thank you for having me on.
So Dr. Malcmacher is a Kohein, and since this week's program is about the difficulties of part of our program is about being a Kohein and a physician, dealing with cadavers, etc. Dr. Malcmacher, we thought we would try to find a Kohein. We found you. So how did you deal in medical school, being a Kohein, with when they asked you to work on a cadaver? How did you deal with it?
So, I mean, obviously the first thing to do is to make sure that you ask shilas, and there are all kinds of shilas that come up. I'm sure we'll touch on some of them. But I specifically, especially when the way it was set up in the dental school I was in, the first 2 years, the medical students and the dental students were pretty much all together in most of the classes, and including anatomy classes, and the anatomy classes always, had a cadaver component to it. So I went to, the heads of the class, some of the professors, and I told them my situation, and they were very, very accommodating in terms of that. So, I mean, the sock that I got at the time was we could be in the same room. Obviously, we couldn't touch the cadaver or do anything on the cadaver. And I was paired up with other students who were more than happy, to do their share of dissection and everything else. So I was pretty much one of the lucky ones, but that's pretty much the experience of anybody going through this, really through this at the time, was, to try to make some kind of accommodations. And I can tell you from knowing other Kohanim that have gone to medical dental schools that, sometimes it was a much bigger difficulty than imagined. And it wasn't as simple as just going over to the professors of the class. You had to really, sometimes they didn't want to be accommodating. You had to go higher, and sometimes it can be, a real hassle for that.
So Dr. Malcmacher was referring to the fact that, Roy Paiskim hold that a guy is not metama ba'oil, right? That's what we paskin. So therefore, there's no problem being in the same room. And as far as touching, he says he got a waiver. So therefore, in other words, even without coming on to any of the very, I would say, sort of shaky heterim of touching a mace, you actually did it straight away by negotiating with the staff. So based on that, do you think that a Kohen could attend medical school or nursing school using the same negotiating tactic that you did, or do you think for maybe a physician, it has to be more hands-on and be more difficult?
So I would tell you, and again, because I deal with a lot of healthcare education today, because that's the basis of our business here, I would tell you that if for a dental professional, you can get away pretty easy, because that was pretty much the extent of all I had to do in terms of cadaver training. So the rest of my training didn't involve anything else like that, and that's true of dental education today. Medical education, though, has gotten much more complicated, and with that, a lot of cadaver training will go ahead and be through all 4 years of medical school, well into residencies and into fellowships. It is much more difficult today to go ahead and for a Kohein lechatchila to go ahead and go to medical school, apply to medical school, and then it's going to be hard to accommodate everything that consists of medical education today and be able to accommodate a Kohein all the way through. So now again, you can always you would have to negotiate way out. Yeah.
When you say difficult, you mean like how difficult? Like 50% difficult or 95% difficult? Like to say if I'm a Kohen, I show up, I say, hi, my name is Mr. Cohn, and, Professor, I really can't touch a cadaver, but I want to become a surgeon. What are my chances of negotiating this successfully?
Your chances of again, if you're going to become a surgeon, your chances of negotiating this are very, very small. I mean 2%, 5%. I mean, most surgeons today, throughout their medical school training,
okay.
But even when they're in practice, they practice on cadavers. Let's
say I want to become a family practitioner. What are my chances?
Right, your chances are better, and you get what you negotiate. There's no question. The issue is that most medical school, most people starting medical school do not know what kind of position they may want to be. They may have an idea, but once you get into medical school education, nursing, it's all the same. You don't know what, you may change that. I want to be a dermatologist. I want to be, a surgeon. I want to be, one of the many pathologists. I want to be one of the many physicians. That may change over time. So, it's hard for a Kohen to really go ahead and think that 4 years later, 6 years later, 10 years later, depending on how much education they need, to really predict where they're going to end up. But to be a surgeon, the likelihood is very, very small.
Okay. Now, may a physician treat a geisis?
So again, I'm not a Pesach at all, but this is going to be a massive shaila as to at what point, if I'm a physician and I'm a Kohen and I'm treating a goses, and there's going to be a mace. Did I treat this patient a few days before they died? Does that count towards a death? And assuming that even b'shoigeg that a Kohen would not be able to duchen. At what point am I going to give up my right to duchen to go ahead and do this? That gets very, very shaky. No, as there are people that are mater, if it's a gozes, if it's a mace b'shogeg, and especially in a gozes situation, it might be okay. But it's, at what point? I mean, I think that's one of the big shilas now that happens in this. Is it the gozes? I treated him 10 minutes before he was nifter. I treated him an hour, 2 hours, 2 days. At what point, does that kick in? So, I know very few, at this point in time, I knew a lot more earlier in my years. At this point in time, I know very few Kohanim that would even consider medicine, and those that have gone into medicine, it's so few and far between now. It's much less than it's ever been before.
Okay.
For this shilah and a million other shilahs.
So let me ask you, now somebody did become a physician, and he's working in a hospital. What could he do to mitigate all the problems? And walk us through, what would be the problems of working in a hospital, and what could he do to mitigate them?
Right. So many practical problems. And, if this Kohen doctor is in, I don't even want to say Wichita, Kansas, because there are Jews in Wichita, Kansas. But imagine, an outlying place, right, where there come out.
That's right. Where it's certainly a Roy vacuum.
Yeah, certainly Roy vacuum, if not like a Jew is barely sighted in the place. That obviously becomes easier because again, with those heterim that say that oil is not a problem by a guy who's a mace. Then that becomes much easier. But if you're in New York, Cleveland, Lakewood, Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, Toronto, where, of course, most people are going to want to live, and there are a lot of Jewish patients, is that hospital set up correctly? Where is the pathology lab? Where are the cadavers kept? Israel going to be a problem? And you have Jews that are dying in hospice, in the hospitals all the time. It makes it very hard. I mean, at this point in time, it's hard even for, it's difficult for a Kohein who's not a doctor just to visit people in the hospital. I mean, you read so many shilas about this, if you're going in and out, if it's quickly, if you know that there's a ghost who's Jewish, you're not allowed to go in. It's hard enough for someone who's just doing, just visiting somebody in the hospital, much less working in there for a 12-hour shift. It becomes very, very difficult. They really have to be aware of the layout of the hospital, where the cadavers kept, how many Jewish patients. I mean, what are the chances a Jewish patient is dying every day, every few hours in such a hospital? What kind of hospital is it? I mean, there are some hospitals that are not trauma hospitals. They go there. They can be small hospitals where it's just very limited care, and people typically are not being nifter there. They're not there for any serious issues. That's a different kind of a situation. Hospitals is very tough. A Kohein doctor in a private practice, or even in the hospital practice that's off-site of a hospital, makes it much easier to be able to practice medicine if they're a Kohein.
Okay, now let me move on to another shaila. Let's say a Kohein is a physician, and he operates on somebody, and he's unsuccessful, and the person dies. So the Shulchan Aruch says Kohein Shaarei Sadefesh is not allowed to do Birchas Kohanim anymore.
Right.
Like, have you ever discussed this shaila, this issue?
Never discussed this shaila because I don't know currently any Kohanim that are surgeons, and most of them for this reason. Even if they are physicians, they do not go into surgery exactly for some of these reasons. I mean, people die all the time. Surgeries are unsuccessful all the time. And again, I can tell you, part of being a great surgeon in this day and age, I have a friend, here in Cleveland who's a reconstructive plastic surgeon for the Cleveland Clinic, not a Kohein, but he does, surgeries are very technology based. They get very complicated. They practice these surgeries on cadavers. It'd be very hard for a Kohein to be a successful surgeon in this day and age. And again, there are, for those, I want to ask Mechila, for those who may be a Kohein and are a surgeon, they deal with these shilas all the time, but it's really a rare occurrence at this point in time.
Now, is there a possibility, what about if it's not a surgeon? Let's say a doctor who prescribed the wrong medication, or an oncologist, and the patient dies. Would there be a problem with him? Because a Kohein Shaarei Sadefesh, even b'shgaga, is not allowed to do Birchas Kohanim anymore. Have you ever discussed with a Kohein doctor this issue?
I have discussed this issue with Kohanim doctors, and again, they tend to, they ask their own shilas. I mean, but clearly, as you pointed out, I mean, there are shilas to this effect, and it's not a pleasant situation for a Kohen who's a doctor, any doctor to ever lose a patient. But when you're putting, you're duchening at risk, there are very few Kohanim that are willing to go ahead and do that anymore. And they try to stay away. That's why. I mean, if the Kohanim that are doctors that I know tend to go ahead and be in a family practice where they're not seeing life and death issues, on a regular basis, or treating life and death issues. They're treating the day-to-day, minor traumas, injuries, managing diseases, diabetes, those kinds of things. And then once it goes above that, then they typically are going, that they're going to be referred to other specialists, or Kohanim who may be an ophthalmologist, who may be an ophthalmologist that focuses just on the eye. They're typically not going to deal with life and death issues for that. But it's going to be rare that you're going to find the Kohanim who are surgeons, who are oncologists, who are ER doctors, those kinds of things that really deal with life and death issues every single day.
So let me share a svara, and I apologize to my audience, but this is a pretty remote area in halacha, that. So it's not an area that I have expertise, or that I've I will do after this call. I'll do a little research. But I want to share with you a possible svara. In other words, the halacha, let's say, if a Kohein sheharages hanefesh is pata, even if he's b'shoigeg, let's say he did a mila, and is because ein kateger naser saneger. In other words, the hands that kill don't bless. But I would take the position that a physician who's coming to try to cure a sick patient, I don't remember the name. There was an Orthodox fellow who was the head of oncology in the Cleveland Clinic. You may know who he is. And I met him once, and he shared with me something very powerful, a life lesson. He said that after he was a physician for a number of years, he decided, in oncology, sadly, patients die, or some of them die. And he went to Rav Palm, who was his Rabbi, and he said he wants to quit being a physician because he can't deal with the pain of losing patients. And Rav Palm told him, he said, let me ask you, the patients of yours that die, if you hadn't treated them, what would have happened? And he responded, well, they would have died earlier. He said, so what do you do? He says, well, I prolong life, but ultimately I lose. So Rav Palm said, you can't look at it that they died. You have to look, eventually everybody dies. You have to look at it what you did. And what you did is you were a creative. You prolong life. You haven't done death. You haven't created a situation of death. You've actually prolonged life. So I would say that if people are coming to a physician and they're seriously ill, and the doctor attempts to make their lives longer and fails, that would not be considered. That would not be an issue of where it would endanger his ability to be. He's not a kateger at that point. He's only a saneger. I think the issue would be is where the physician performed malpractice and it was, negligent. And I imagine that you would agree that's a pretty rare occasion, would you?
Right, absolutely. And I want to tell you, Reb David, that's a very powerful story. And, the svara, has some justification. There's no question about it. I think some, in the discussion about a male that does a mila and, chas v'shalom, the baby dies, and if it's a Kohein, some of that discussion is also, well, maybe the mitzvah of mila protects the Kohein, and and they can still duchen. Some of that discussion goes on as well. But I think it's a very powerful story because Lamaisa, this Kohein oncologist, or if this was a Kohein, I know he wasn't a Kohein, but let's say he was a Kohein. They really did prolong life. As you say, listen, it was done already that this patient was going to die. They got Machla, they got, God forbid, any other Machla that's out there. The question is when, and that's the job of a good doctor, is to prolong the life. It's not a matter of that what he did was killing. The Machla was killing him. It wasn't this doctor that was killing him. If anything, he's trying to save him for longer. And yes, unfortunately, patients do die. I think we're all aware of that.
Where is the case that you're referring to? That's in Kuf Chav Ches in Berth, where it talks about mole, the debate whether mole. Look, the child was healthy and would have been healthy without the mila. So right. In effect, even though the doctor is doing a mitzvah, the moil is doing a mitzvah, but at that point he is the one who is creating this deathly situation and actually kill the child. So here you're dealing with a healthy child that you're trying to do a mitzvah that ultimately the operation kills. Here you're dealing with a deathly ill person that you are prolonging the life, and maybe you weren't successful in prolonging the life. I just see a chiluk in that respect. Is there anything else as a physician and a kohen that you would like to add to this conversation that we may have missed?
Let me just go back to what you just said, because I think, I think that's why the svara is a good svara. And just to reframe it a little bit, in the case of Mila, the expectation of a Mila is that the baby's going to live a long and healthy life. Here, the expectation of this patient coming in is they're already in trouble. That's the Lamaisa. They're already in trouble, and this doctor is prolonging life. I think it's very good. It's excellent what you said. I would go back almost to where we started, and that is, at this point in time, listen, any Kohen that is a physician, and I've known a number of them, and interestingly enough, many times what's happened is, a Kohein that became a physician, many of them were Baalei Tshuva, and they became Frum after they got into medical school or after they were practicing already. So they're with the Rabbanim that guiding them, they kind of managed to get through all of this. L'chatchila, though, when there are Kohanim that want to go into healthcare professions, and certainly, I talk to many people wanting to get into the healthcare professions, and some of them may be Kohanim. If they are looking to do something, there are better choices. For example, again, someone starting out l'chatchila and they have a choice of what to do. It's very, very hard these days. And we live in a Medina Shel Chesed, and a lot of hospitals and a lot of systems try to accommodate. We certainly know the growth of all the Shomer Shabbos residencies. But this is going a little further than most in the accommodations that you're going to need. And the question really that people have to ask themselves, if they're a Kohen they just have to be a physician or maybe even a surgeon, they feel that's their life's calling. You have to think about are you really going to be able in this day and age that's so advanced to really be the best physician or surgeon you can be if you are a Kohen with all of those challenges? Again, take it out of the practical or the Halachik issues for that, which obviously that's always a part of this. But with those Halachik issues, are you really going to be the best physician or surgeon that you could possibly be, that really patients expect? And you have to really ask yourself that question. And if not, nursing may be more of a possibility for people wanting to get into this. Dentistry may be, podiatry. There are other options if you really want to be a healthcare professional, if you are a Kohen, where you can still be the best that you can be, but you're not going to have these lifelong shilas when it comes down to being a Kohen as a physician.
Now, we have one of our guests is Dr. Alan Kadish. Do you know who he is?
I know the name. I don't know who he is.
He's
the provost of Touro.
Of Touro, and Touro Medical, which is now, I believe, the only Shomer Shabbos medical program in outside of Israel. He says they have absolute accommodations for Kohanim. Have you ever looked into it? Have you ever seen the accommodations that they've made? Have you ever inquired? I'm curious.
No, I don't know anything about Touro's program, but I do know one thing about Touro. If they say they have it, then absolutely they can. Then they can deliver. We have worked with Touro University in Nevada, and the Touro system is worldwide renowned in medicine and dentistry. I'm sure that is. The question is for Kohanim, though, is what happens after Touro, right? What happens when they have to go into a hospital setting, have to go ahead and practice later on? They're not going to have the great Touro University. They're going to have to deal with these for the rest of their careers. And that, is it doable? Absolutely. Will they be presented with more and more shilas, many shilas of which we probably don't even know yet because, technology and medical technology and techniques change on almost a daily, weekly basis. So we don't know what's going to happen later on and how it will really affect them.
Let me ask you a final question, Doctor. How important is it that we have Fruma physicians? Like maybe the attitude should be, look, there are so many issues today with electricity and hospitals, like Maliyat Tzara Zais, like what do we need it for? Or is there, really a clear need that, our community does need its own physicians? It may have unique needs. There may be better patient care, et cetera. How would you respond to that?
I think just personal opinion, obviously, you could take it for what it's worth. But personal opinion, there's an absolute need from physicians in this day and age. With the growth of the Frum community, and again, the growth of these medical technologies. I mean, we need someone that's really well trained to know, are these appropriate for Frum people? What are the Halachik shilas that's coming with medical technology? Again, on a daily basis, I think there's an absolute need for Frum physicians for that. But again, it's much easier to be a Frum physician than it is to be a Kohen physician. That's for sure. But is there a need? I think that need is probably greater than it's ever been before.
Explain why.
I think, again, just to have those kinds of people in the places where we can go ahead and know from a halachic aspect. What are the new technologies? I mean, imagine what we can do now with stem cells, DNA replication, all the different things. The shilas when I was in dental school and where medicine was at are puny compared to the shilas that happen today. I mean, the things that we can do today, you literally can change the essence of a physical human being. You can literally duplicate parts of a physical, human being. I mean, the halachic shilas that are coming down to this, and I think even the halachic literature in medicine is growing by leaps and bounds because of all of this. So you're going to need from physicians that are trained in this, that know this. Are they going to be appropriate, for Yidden and appropriate technologies, or what kind of shilas do they bring up? That's number one. But I think the Frum community has specific needs, at the very least psychological needs, and even physical needs. That, and again, the accommodation for Shabbos and Yontif and chametz issues and medicine issues and fasting issues. All those things are never going to go away. And I think that Frum physicians bring a lot to patient care, especially in the Frum population, and certainly with the mental health issues more than ever before. Many Frum people will trust what comes out of a Frum physician's mouth, as opposed to what comes out of someone who doesn't understand our culture, our religion, our needs. I think more than ever there's a need for Frum physicians.
Well, thank you very much, Doctor, for your time.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be with you, Rabbi David. Keep doing the great work that you do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malcmacher Kultov. Let's go to the chosen winner of this week's riddle.
Do you have to be mechabed the grandfather? So Rashi says in this week's parasha, look, I'm a grandfather. Baruch Hashem, beautiful grandchildren. Vayizbach zvachim lelekei aviv Yitzchak, what does Rashi say? Chayiv adam bekaved aviv, yoiser mikvayid ziknei. A person is mechabed to honor his father, obviously in the Sarah, but more than not as much as a grandfather. I'm sorry, let me do this again. Riddle of the week. Do you have to be mechabed a grandfather? Right? So what does Rashi say in this week's parasha? Vayizbach zvachim lelekei aviv Yitzchak, he made sacrifices in honor of the God of his father Yitzchak. So Rashi says, why does he say of Yitzchak, not Aviv Avrohom? He says, you see that chayiv adam b'kaid aviv, yoiser mikaid ziknei, you have to have kibbud av, and it's greater than kavod of a grandfather. You need kavod of a grandfather, but it's not as much as kavod of a father. And the Makor is a medrash rabbah. So here's the problem. The problem is, and the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch and Yeridei Siman Reish Mem brings from the great Marik that a person brings a shita. You're not mechuyev in kavod of a grandfather. So Ramah says, what do you mean? It's a befarish medrash that you mechuyev b'kavod aviv yoisem mikvayid zikna, but a grandfather too. So he says, the Ramah says, the avada you mechuyev mechabed the zayda, but a father is more. Makes sense. Problem is, the Rashi in Makis and Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph is talking about a case where a father, Rahman al accidentally killed a son. So the question is, could a grandson become a goyal adam against the father, against the grandfather? So Rashi says, a grandson could become a goyal adam against the grandfather, right? In other words, he could chase him to Tadari Mikvah and kill him if he didn't get there in time. Why? Because there's no chiyuv kibbud av by a grandfather. So Rashi in our parasha brings the medrash that is a chiyuv kibbud av by a grandfather. It's just not as big as to your father. And in Makis he says a grandchild could become a goyal adam because there's no chiyuv kibbud av to a grandfather.
Hi, Rabbi David. I would like to answer what I think is the answer to the riddle, that the chiyuv kibbud, even the chiyuv to be mechabed the grandfather is only, the Torah doesn't say you have to be mechabed the grandfather, it says the father. But the chiyuv comes, it's the vaya from that your father will have kuvud if you are mechabed his father. That's a way of showing respect to your father by being mechabed his father. Therefore, when someone's father got killed by his father, and you're the goyal adam, then it's a bigger kibbud for you, for your father, when you're taking your makana his blood, then do you be mechabed your grandfather while not doing anything? I think that's the answer. Thank you.